Welcome to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to reduce the stigma around suicide. In this series, we speak to a range of people who've been affected by or with lived experience of suicide. I'm your host, Gemma Cutting, and in each episode, I'm joined by Professor Pooja Saini, lead of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University.
I wanted to do this series to showcase the voices of people who have been brave enough to speak about their experiences and who are constantly inspiring hope in other people who may find themselves in a similar situation. I'm in a unique position as an academic expert in suicide prevention who has had the opportunity to speak with people with personal experiences of suicide and those involved in setting up suicide-specific community-based services. My role has been to ensure that these services are designed to work well for the people who need them and that they embed evaluation and research to show the impact of their work.
In this series, you're going to hear from a really diverse range of people who really illustrate that anyone can be touched by suicide, regardless of age, background, or gender. These are important and impactful stories that we hope will open up conversations about suicide. And if you know someone who you feel would benefit from listening to this series, please pass it on. This episode is all about suicide post-vention. And myself and Pooja had an amazing chat with three people, Mike, Angela and Alison, who've all been bereaved by suicide. And then they've gone on to really help other people in amazing ways, but in completely different ways from each other. And in this chat, we talk about allowing people to talk about being bereaved by suicide. We talk about post-vention being part of prevention and feelings of isolation from people close to you.
Yeah, and I've come across all these three people because of research and evaluation and to look at how can we see the impact of the great work that they're doing. But actually what I've got to see is how amazing the work is that they're doing and the impact they think they're having is much, much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. This chat is so important, so let's get into it. We are sat with Mike Palmer and Alison Furlong, and I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you two. Mike, I'm going to start with you. Would you mind just telling us your story and your experience of bereavement by suicide and where it's led you to today?
I'm a bereaved father. My daughter, Beth, took her own life in March 2020. She was just 17 years old. As you can imagine, it was earth-shattering. People, say it's devastating. It's far worse than that. But I've gone on quite a bizarre journey since, really. I became suicidal myself after I lost Beth. I'm quite open with that, and I think it's very important that people understand that is what happens post-suicide. I went from a stereotypical strong firefighter into basically I was smashed into pieces. But gradually I had to sort of find focus again. And bizarrely, it came in the form of two other bereaved fathers, Andy and Tim, who, together with myself, formed something called Three Dads Walking. Now, Three Dads Walking, as obviously it seems quite obvious that we walk, but we walk and talk. And basically we campaign now to prevent young suicide. So on the back of that, we raised over £1.5 million for a wonderful charity called Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide. But also we campaign at Westminster to get suicide prevention on the RSHE curriculum. So our work is ongoing, and I'm nearly 5 years down the line now from losing Beth. Not every day is easy, but I have focus now, and I carry on because of my family and also what I do with the three dads. So, that's basically me in a nutshell.
And Alison, would you mind sharing your story?
So my son lost his dad to suicide at the age of 8 back in 2017. And he wanted peer support because he felt like he was offered counselling. And the first question he asked the counsellor was, have you ever lost someone to suicide? And she said no. So he disengaged straight away.
Yeah.
He wanted to meet other children because he felt like he was the only person that was going through it. And he blamed himself. He thought he mustn't have been a good enough child. Otherwise, why would his dad have done what he chose to do? So we tried to find peer support and we couldn't find anywhere. So Alfie decided to step up and sort it out himself. So he's raised well over £100,000 now, and our first ever peer support group for children bereaved by suicide started in August 2023. And it's the only one in the whole of the UK. It still is.
So one thing, Alison, I've obviously been part of the evaluation now of Alfie's squad. And in the last couple of weeks, I've been interviewing some of the parents or carers of the young people coming. I think one thing that really stood out to me was that it's not just the service supporting children bereaved by suicide, and it feels like it's doing a lot more and actually supporting families. So I didn't know if you just wanted to share a bit more about your experience.
Well, when we were setting everything up and when Alfie was coming up with his ideas, I knew from personal experience that peer support for adults bereaved by suicide isn't accessible if you're a parent, because you've essentially lost the childcare. So who's going to mind your child at the most vulnerable time of a bereaved child's day, which is bedtime? So it's like a whole feeling of guilt that you're going to get help and you know that your child needs help as well. So we'd already decided it was going to be more of a family thing. So while the children were getting their peer support, we'd be able to help the rest of the family. So we started with just a parent and carers group, the same time in the same place. And now we're also supporting young adults between 18 to 25 because they didn't fit in to either group. So they were sort of left on their own as well. So we decided to set up that up as well.
Yeah, and I think just to say as well, some of the feedback we've been getting from the families about how coming to Alfie's squad has actually allowed them to speak with their children as well. And on the way there, on the way home, it's provided in a way a safe space for them to remember their loved one and to actually talk about the suicide, which I think has been really powerful.
Yeah, I think we found from our experiences that Alfie's granddad did the same thing. It come down 2 generations, and we think it's because Alfie's dad didn't have any peer support. His dad died on his 13th birthday, so he went through his teenage years without any peer support or counselling because he was at that age where he could choose whether he wanted counselling himself. And we found that some of the older children, once they've started coming to Alfie's squad and they've spoken with the friends and the friends have said, we've been to counselling, it was all right, or, it helped me, then they've gone and asked for counselling themselves, whereas they turned it down previously before they came to Alfie's squad.
No, great. And just thinking about young people as well, Mike, obviously we've kind of come across each other because of the suicide prevention work in schools. So just wanted to find out about what made you want to get involved with our research group as well and to be part of our journey.
Yeah, before I get on to that, I'd just like to say to Alison that, what Alfie Squad do is absolutely, you cannot emphasise enough how important it is. Everything we do and the people we talk to, you don't just lose that person. You can potentially lose family and friends because of that. And the peer support afterwards is absolutely vital. What Alfie Squad doing is absolutely incredible.
Thank you. I'm just his PA really, but...
You're a good PA. You're a good PA. Yeah, coming on to your question, Pooja, it's a bizarre journey we've been on, but we realise that, to make a real difference in suicide prevention, we must invest in our young people, and this goes from basically early years. We need to sort of teach our kids about emotions. We need to definitely talk about suicide prevention within the school's curriculum because the kids know it's there. The cat's out of the bag. We talked before about what happens on mobile phones, social media. We need to get upstream. We need to be proactive in this. And as we found out, and I've seen suicide prevention taught between years 7 all the way to 6th form, and if it's taught well and the kids can interact, and the important thing is if they can smile and even laugh through these things. I mean, it's the most serious subject, but it's life, it's there. And if you allow people to relax and it's not as oppressive, it's far easier for them to process it. And when I see kids leaving these lessons afterwards, they're talking to each other, they're smiling. I mean, even when you speak to them, the positivity of doing this, it's definitely the way forward.
And Mike, can I just ask, is that on the curriculum in every school now?
No, certainly not. No. The curriculum review is going on at the moment. Indeed, I was in Department for Education last week talking about it. They still talk about the risk of mentioning the word suicide. We need suicide prevention taught. But also, if we don't teach our young people, the silence is almost deadly, because then you are encouraging the stigma.
Yeah.
So if you don't talk about it, people don't know how to reach out, we sort of, the way people look at it is there is a risk, and sadly, we all strive for zero suicide. That may never happen, but doing nothing is not an option. We need to get upstream. A whole school approach is definitely the way to go, and everyone must invest in it so it's done safely and properly.
It's the same with Postvention as well, though, because it's like a dirty secret if you've been bereaved by suicide, and it needs to be spoken about. It's a different kind of bereavement. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I can only go by lived experience, and it's a completely different thing, because you've got to tackle the feelings of guilt and self-worth and isolation. We lost a lot of friends when we lost Alfie's dad. I'd said from the start that I was going to be open with Alfie and explain to him to an age-appropriate level what had happened. And if I didn't know the answer to his questions, of which there were many, I'd tell him if I didn't know. But I had people that would contact me and say, can Alfie come and play, but can you just make sure he doesn't tell my child what happened to his dad, because I don't want my child knowing about suicide. And I'm like, well, he can't come round then. Yeah. So it has to be a conversation, as much as it has to be a conversation for suicide prevention, it has to be a conversation post-vention, because you're just adding to the isolation by not mentioning it or not talking about it and not giving the support. So one of the things we want to do is to be able to go to schools, and where Mike does the suicide prevention talks, we want to do the other side. So Alfie wants to start going to schools and giving talks about the benefits of peer support.
That's amazing.
So whether it be if you're into gaming or if you're into Lego, or, you've gone through some sort of bereavement, that there are people out there that you can link in with to help stop the social isolation, which will hopefully stop suicides at some point.
And what has your experience been of that, Alison? When you've told people that about your bereavement by suicide, how have you found that people have reacted to you?
Well, it's nearly 8 years for us now, because it was 2017. But I remember one example. I had a friend who lives around the corner, still does. I spoke to her every day. I've not heard from her since the day I'd told her that we'd lost Alfie's dad. She hasn't been in touch once. And I spoke to her every day up until that point.
And why do you think that is?
I've got no idea. I'm guessing it's because she had children.
Right.
And like I said, we lost a lot of friends, and it's because they don't want, it's a stigma. As much as we need to have the conversation about suicide prevention, it's even more important to have the conversation around not making people feel isolated afterwards. Like, it's not, if someone died of cancer or got run over by a bus, they don't lose friends. People don't walk away and not help them. And if you're bereaved by suicide, you're at higher risk anyway. And can you imagine what it feels like especially for a child who's young, who doesn't understand? Alfie understood what happened. I told him his dad had a poorly head and he'd made the choice to go to heaven, and then he processed that and asked me more information. But he couldn't process how the children have moved on 24 hours later. And that was really difficult. But there just needs to be it needs to be not a dirty subject. It needs to be spoken about normally. And that's what we think with Alfie Squad. The children can talk about things.
And Mike, you're nodding along there. Obviously, your situation is slightly different, but can you relate to what Alison's saying there?
100%. Postvention is part of the prevention. Absolutely. What happens after suicide, you're far more likely to take your own life. I know that for a fact. And I have to live and see what goes on within my family and other close families. It is an absolutely vital part of prevention. And I do believe as if we're teaching suicide prevention in schools, part of that must be postvention. But also we need to upskill, teachers, people involved with the young kid of how to deal with it, help them, because it's devastating, but we need to put more work into it.
Yeah, I think coming from a researcher's side of things as well, and interviewing a lot of people who've been bereaved by suicide, or being friends with people who will talk to me because I work in this field, the element of guilt that's there for people after the death of a loved one is really high. And I think being able to speak about that in a safe environment, and also to see that there's a lot of other people going through similar things to you, and that the guilt hopefully will reduce over time, is really important, because I think it's the guilt that sometimes can really be quite dangerous and a risk for people who've been bereaved by suicide as well.
Definitely. I mean, I see it within my family. My other daughters, they deserve the best lives. And it's how they get over the trauma and guilt, if you like, to carry on. You know, and peer support is a major part of that as well. You know, you realise you're not alone. You can talk to other people. I got peer support off Andy and Tim, you know, because they felt and thought the same as me. You know, and you realise you're not alone, and in that sort of it helps.
And would you say, Alison, obviously you've both discussed the importance of peer support, but would you say that it's also helped doing what you're doing and knowing that you're helping other people? And do you think that that's helped Alfie as well?
Yeah, Alfie spends a long time trying to get this sorted, and COVID put the spanner in the works for a couple of years. So by the time it started, it was, as I said, August 23, so he was 14. And he said to me, I'll just do the first 8 weeks, the pilot, and then I'll be fine, because it's been years for me. And it was only maybe 4 weeks into that, he was like, no, I didn't realise how much I needed it until I've started it. So we still go every week. Now for me, because it's that busy, I don't really get a chance to do much apart from run around like a headless chicken. But I know people are there if I need them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we had a brother and sister, they're only 7 and 8, who joined about a year ago. And they said to the mum on the way home, we're not the only ones, are we? And it's that sort of thing. So if you got we've got nearly 50 children now, started with 6, 18 months ago. But all those children, they come in thinking, well, we can't all be bad children. And that sort of helps them get over the guilt of it, because they know we're all really nice kids. So we can't be the problem. And I think that really helps. And that starts conversations with their family members.
Yeah. And Mike, do you feel like it's helped you personally, the Three Dads Walking?
Oh, hugely. Hugely. It came out of nowhere. We started off as just 3 bereaved dads who wanted to do something proactive and raise a couple of thousand for Papyrus each. It became much bigger than that. It almost feels though it was meant to be. But certainly for me, you know, I had to carry on. For me to carry on, I had to refocus on my family, what would happen if I wasn't there. I had to refocus on them, but very much doing what I do with the Three Dads campaigning, because we're passionate about it. We absolutely believe in what we do. We believe we need change, and we believe we can make a difference.
Well, I think what you're both doing, and obviously Alfie included in that, is absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for chatting to us. Angela Samata's joined us. Angela, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I thought it would be nice to start if you could kind of tell your story. So your bereavement by suicide and how that's really led you to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it was 21 years ago when I was bereaved by suicide, and it was my partner who died. And at the time we had 2 children who were 3 and 13. And I think that, you know, I suppose naively, I'd always assumed that, you know, if somebody was going to die by suicide or going to end their own life, that you would be able to know that was going to happen. But actually, with Mark, I definitely didn't know that was going to happen, or it was a possibility. And I think for me, you know, all the work that I've had the great privilege of being involved in those 21 years has kind of, you know, I'm constantly trying to reassure people and to encourage them to talk openly and honestly, because I suppose there's a bit of wishful thinking on my part, because I kind of wish that's what happened with us.
Yeah. And what is it exactly that you are doing now?
Now, that's the $64 million question.
What isn't Angela doing is the question.
I do lots of things. I have dual careers, so I work in the arts. I am the chair of an advisory board at Tate Liverpool. I work with lots of individual artists, but I was doing that before Mark died. So when he passed away, it was really a journey of discovery for me. You know, I didn't really know anybody else who'd been bereaved by suicide, and I certainly didn't understand the link between suicide, kind of post-vention, you know, how we support people bereaved by suicide, and prevention for the next generation, you know. And so I think that for me, it's been a bit of a journey of discovery, which I, again, work on lots of different projects around suicide bereavement and suicide prevention as well. But probably some of the most notable things I've done recently, I fronted a BBC documentary called Life After Suicide, which remarkably went to BAFTA, you know, which was just incredible. I kind of felt like I was representing like everybody who'd lost somebody to suicide on that night. But I also co-authored the Zero Suicide Alliance training, the 20-minute free training. And probably most recently, the most public thing that I've done is I recorded a TEDx talk on suicide prevention and suicide post-vention and the link between the two.
Yeah, so Angela, I obviously saw you first when you did your BBC programme.
Right, okay.
And I reached out to you and contacted you about setting up James's Place.
Yeah.
And being involved in that programme. So yeah, I think it'd be great if we could share some of the work we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's your incredible academic knowledge and your kind of really kind of pushing the academic envelope on suicide and suicide prevention and postvention together with, I suppose, my lived experience and lots of other people's lived experience as well, I think has been an incredible transformational combination, actually.
Yeah, and I think the kind of element that we're trying to provide, I think communities where we can talk about suicide more openly and also think about the people working within the field of suicide. So it'd be great to talk about some of the work you've been doing with Sharon.
Yeah, you know, Suicide Bereavement UK, I think, came from lived experience, you know, from Dr. Sharon McDonnell and losing her brother to suicide, which she's talked about very publicly. And, you know, I think like many of us, you know, we have our individual lived experience, which usually kind of opens the door to other people telling us about their lived experience. And I heard a phrase recently, which was not just lived experience, but living experience, you know, so what we're all actually going through at the moment or what we're going through kind of because of losing somebody to suicide. And the work with Suicide Bereavement UK really is about that, you know, it's about bringing together that academic evidence base, creating like amazing training and kind of allowing people to develop their own skills. You know, I just feel as if lots of the work that I've done, and certainly you've done as well, Pooja, is about, you know, we can't just keep saying to people, you know, suicide, bereavement, suicide postvention is everybody's business. We have to give people an opportunity to develop the tools to do something about it. You know, you can't just keep putting pressure on people saying it's everybody's business. Well, okay, it's everybody's business. We all play a part in the community of trying to prevent suicide, you know, but I feel as if lots of my work, certainly with Suicide Bereavement UK and yourself, Pooja, is about equipping people with those tools, you know, and so trying to take the synthesis of our knowledge and experience together and kind of giving it to people to use as they want to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one element that we've made sure that we've embedded is evaluating and researching everything we're doing. And I know recently you've delved into writing yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to share that experience.
I think that for me, it's I've written lots of different training packages. I've been involved in writing lots of things with lots of different people, and I've kind of, you know, played different parts in different books and TV programs and things. But I think for me, it's almost like cathartic, you know, trying to articulate my own experience and trying to, and hoping, keeping everything crossed that it makes sense to somebody else, you know, that it lands with somebody else and they know that. I just remember that feeling of initially being bereaved and just feeling, I remember, you know, 4 o'clock in the morning, when the 4 o'clock in the morning questions are going through your head, you know, why didn't I see it coming? What could I have done differently? I just remember feeling like I was the only person in the world who'd ever experienced this. And it was the loneliest place. And I think whatever I write, whatever I talk about is hopefully reaching that other person who thinks they're the only person in the world that this has happened to as well. And I think the weight of that grief can be so overwhelming that it can make us feel kind of like we're never going to get out of this, we're never going to kind of feel hopeful again or laugh again, or, so everything that I write, I hope that it's kind of just offering that hand of friendship, really. You're not the only person that this has happened to. And yeah, I've been there too.
And what have you got coming up moving forwards? Is there anything that you can tell us about that?
There's some things I can't tell you about. So there's some things still in development, and I'm constantly having a conversation about TV. There's lots of moving parts. It's actually almost 10 years since we originally made Life After Suicide. So there's constant conversations about a follow-up, or about kind of, revisiting some of the people I interviewed. But probably the most recent thing, which will come out in the middle of 2025, is that Jane and I, who wrote the Zero Suicide Alliance training, we've kind of got the band back together again, and we have co-authored suicide prevention and post-vention training specifically for nursing and allied health professionals with NHS England. So we're literally recording the voiceovers for that tomorrow. So we'll be doing that, but that should be out and available to nurses and allied health professionals through NHS England. That'll be available middle of 2025, but again, I think that we've put Postvention in there as well, because this is about that link. For me, is pivotal, that link between postvention and prevention. I think it's been one of the biggest innovations, that clear link between the two in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that piece of work you're doing aimed at nurses is really important, because one of the kind of findings this year in the official National Statistics report was the big increase in suicides in female nurses, unfortunately. So I don't think it could be more timely.
Yeah, and we've included some of that data actually in the training, because I don't think that, I think we presume a lot of knowledge. We presume that people know what's happening within their own communities, their own healthcare settings, and I don't think people necessarily do. So we've included some of that data. So yeah, it's been incredible to, again, use the evidence base, but then kind of we did lots of focus groups. So all of the scenarios that are in the training are taken from real examples that people have told us about. So yeah, I'm hoping that our nurses and our health professionals kind of welcome it. But yeah, I've always got my fingers crossed. I'm never quite sure anything makes sense until it's out there and people tell me that it's okay, because until that point, I think you're kind of wondering, is this going to land okay? But I'm really looking forward to it. We've shown it to some people at NHS England and they loved it. So fingers crossed for that.
That's great. And I'm sure everyone else will love it as well.
Let's see.
Angela, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to you both.
Thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to end the stigma around suicide. Brought to you by Professor Pooja Saini, head of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. This podcast was produced by Inabella Media and hosted by me, Gemma Cutting. Thanks for listening.